Yo, what's up? I'm the Chess Guy and welcome to another video about chess strategy. In this video, we're going to talk about the 7th rank. And the nice thing about this strategic concept, the 7th rank, is that there's a lot of tactics. So this makes it super easy to understand. And I'm going to show you a lot of cool ideas and motives that revolve around this 7th rank. And this will hopefully get you a better understanding of how good the 7th rank actually is. Let's get started. Alright, here in the first example we can see that the white rooks are both positions on the 7th rank. And just for the record, black can also occupy the 7th rank, which would technically be the 2nd rank for white, but the ideas and stuff are the same, so let's not dwell on that. But in this situation there's a very simple mate in 3, yep, 3, check, king here, yep, pop, pop. Alright, this is just the starting point to show you one of the mating patterns in the 7th rank. And when the king is short castled, you can actually mate like this by force. But this is very simple. We're moving on to our next example. Sometimes we need the 8 of a pawn, because now the f8 square is not blocked by a rook. What we can actually do is we can check again, and after the king goes to f8, note that the rook is now defended by the pawn, and we checkmate like this. Still very simple. Moving on. Here we have the same idea as the first example. The problem is that the piece on f8 is not a rook but a knight, and the knight defends h7. So what white can do here is sack the queen. After rook takes, there is another mate in 2, like the one we've shown before, but a little bit harder this time. Still fairly simple, I hope, and we're moving on rather quick to our next example, which is this one. Here we see that there's a permanent discovery check available for white. So in this situation, you want to keep the rook on the 7th rank to cut off the king, leaving only the g8 square available to it. After rook f7, the king has one move, and you go back to a check. And this way, you can basically take all of the stuff on the 7th rank, and there's nothing black can do, till eventually you grab the queen. That's a nice cleanup, but also this motive with the bishop and the rook like that, it's quite thematic, and it happens more often than you would think. So here we have another example of how good the rooks on the 7th are. You might be wondering, oh my god, you're losing here because black is about to promote a pawn, and okay, maybe you can perpetual check and make a draw. But we can actually use a mating pattern with the rooks on the 7th rank, forcing the black king to continuously move. So if we check, the king goes here, we check again, the king goes here, and what we can do now is we can take the pawn. Black cannot promote due to a checkmate on a8, so they're forced to go back. What we do is we throw another check, and rinse and repeat. And now that the 7th rank is cleared up, we can go rook h7. And in this situation, yeah, black is going to lose, because if promotes, it's once again mate in 1. If they want to stop the mate with king b8, we just take the rook, and if black takes the rook on h7, or yeah, h7, the h2 pawn is stopped, and pretty sure you can convert this. And here we have an example of a game between Anand versus Kamsky, and Anand played rook d1. Basically, black can resign because yeah, the rook is going to enter on to d7, and the bishop is kind of overloaded, right? Because if the bishop wants to stop rook d7, it has to move because it's attacked, but if it moves, it lets go of h7, and rook h7 is mate. So in the game there was bishop g6, and after rook d7, it's basically over. There's a mate in 2 threat with rook h7, and yeah, black cannot stop this. Once again, the power of the doubled rooks on the 7th only needs one more piece with the knight, and this is a GG's. Moving on to this example, here we see that black is threatening mate in 1 with rook a1. And there's not really a good way for white to threaten checkmate, because if they do, they are going to get checkmated first with rook a1. The question here is, you can make a perpetual, but you have to decide which rook to check on e7. How you can sort of figure this out is that you look at this bishop. The bishop controls this square on the 7th rank. So if the king would end up on b8, we cannot check it anymore. Now that we know that, it's as simple as rook f to e7 check. And this way we can just keep on checking the king with this rook. not allowing the black king to run to the B side, to the B file. One more example with how you can use the 7th rank is you can lure the king sometimes. In this position, white can play rook d7, luring the black king up, and then you just fork the king and queen. So this saves the game for white. And our last example is a little bit more difficult, but even in the middle game and in the attacking phase, you can use the 7th rank. So here we see white infiltrated with the rook on e7, and all it needs is a little bit more attacking force. So there's a forcing sequence here that revolves around knight h7, and black takes, and after queen g6, the mate on g7 is unstoppable. These examples showed you a lot of different tactical motives using the 7th rank. So we're going to switch it up, and we'll do some more difficult puzzles together, and at the end I'll add a little bit harder puzzles for you at the end to solve as well. So let's move on to these harder puzzles. In this first exercise, we see some resemblance to positions we've seen before in the video. Although things are slightly different here, the pawn is not on the edge of the board, it's on g3, and white is about to promote to a queen. But black to move, and you can actually win. The correct way to do this is by a silent move. So don't go for the checks. There's actually a better move here that sort of will remind you of the motive that we've seen before. But the correct move here for black is rook g2. And the threat here is hopefully recognizable to you, because rook f2, king e1, and the rook is now defended by the pawn, and it's a checkmate. So yeah, there's not really much white can do here. Basically resignable. There is no stopping rook f2 and rook g1 checkmate. Moving on to puzzle number 2. This one we see that we are playing with black. It is a black to move, and there is no piece on the 7th rank, or in this case a rook on the 2nd. So if we start with rook d2, that is not the answer. But there is a very nice way that we can utilize the threat of rook d2. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, the tactic revolves around this square. So the concept is the 7th rank, but we're going to first use some tactics to open up the 7th rank. So we go knight f3, we threaten mate in 1 on h2, the white needs to take the knight, and then after rook d2, there is no stopping queen to h2, checkmating. So that's puzzle number 2. Moving on to puzzle number 3, where we can see that the rook from black is on the 7th rank, or 2nd rank, and the black queen is pinning their queen. So if it was white to move, you cannot checkmate on h7 because the queen's pinned, but we are playing with black here, and it's black to move. And this is also very thematical and important mating pattern. I want you to sort of memorize, or at least glad I'm showing this to you, because it's very common for a chess game to end in certain fashion, where after a queen trade, knight drops to f3, and rook h2 is just checkmate. The knight and rook coordinate perfectly fine like this, and can actually deliver a checkmate in the corner to the enemy king. There's no stopping rook h2 here. Last example that we'll do together before we're gonna send some other puzzles your way. This one is a bit more tricky. So perhaps you remember this mating idea. When there's a rook on f8, you can do this checkmate idea. Well, that will come in handy in this puzzle to find the answer here, because once you know that, you can able to solve this. The problem is, how do we get something to end up on f8? Well, it's not knight f8. The wishful thinkers expect rook takes f8, and then you can checkmate. But after king takes f8, tactics are not in your favor, and maybe you're even losing this. I don't know. But you can actually win this. So what you should do first throw in this check. So that forces the king to the corner. And now you go knight f8. The main threat is knight g7 checkmate. We already know if black takes the piece on f8, there is this mating pattern that arises again. But the problem for black here is after knight to f8, there is no stopping the mate here, basically. There's knight g6, and there's no other way for black to avoid that rather than to take, I believe. And this is just a GG's. All right. With these exercises, I'm going to start sending you off to solving some puzzles for yourself. I hope that you can start to recognize mating patterns and ideas that revolve around this 7th rank as a strategical concept that will gain you a lot of tactical opportunities. Because now that you have sort of seen all these different ideas, you can start implementing them into your own games. So I would love to hear from you if this was useful, if you are starting to use this in your own games and be more successful. But thank you so much for watching. Good luck with the puzzles that we're showing on screen, and I'll see you on a future video.